to just welcome everybody to the Barnyard experience. We have two main presenters, Dr. Clinton Hutton, who is no stranger to UTC's Founders Week. Last time he was here, he was talking about Haiti. They reminded me this morning, Clinton, that you're a graduate of V. Michael.
Yes.
Yes. So Clinton started off as an artist and a teacher and lectures in the Department of Government. Our very, very special guest today is Her Excellency the South African High Commissioner, who is going to teach us how to properly pronounce her name.
Matu. The H is silent. M-A-T-H-U. Matu.
Matu. Welcome. Welcome. We have some other guests, some you met this morning for those who are here. We have our three guests from Columbia Theological Seminary. Kelly Campbell, who is Associate Dean and Librarian. Deborah Mullen, who is the Dean of Studies for Columbia Theological Seminary. Kevin Park, who is in charge of the Doctor of Ministry Programs and a whole heap of other things. We have the Dean of St. Michael's, Mrs. Sharon Fonkong Foran, and we have Dr. Booth's niece, Donna. Donna and Phoebe, please stand. We have to greet you specially. So thank you so much for coming this morning, coming last night, coming back today, and we hope we'll see you for many more times. Also back with us is Miss Diane McIntosh, who is Director General in the Ministry of Finance. I hope that means there's some good financial blessings here for us. Friends all, welcome. I want to remind you, forget Evie. You know, they say whatever they say about familiarity. Okay. Deaconess Dr. Rachel Vernon, who provoked, challenged, disturbed, and I would say inspired us this morning as she reflected on Dr. Booth's work and wove in so beautifully the music of Marian Anderson. Thank you so much, Dr. Vernon. I never knew, was Marian Anderson a Methodist? Please tell me. Was she Methodist? I don't know, but I'd never heard that I'm a Methodist song before. And so we thank you for being here from the UK and rejoice in the mischievous ways of God. Oh, yeah. That an organization formerly known as the United Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, which was once owning enslaved Africans, now has in charge of theological education and leadership formation a descendant of some of those persons in the form of Dr. Vernon. So we don't know what is happening. I should also welcome another person who I think hasn't been here before, which is Mrs. Gillian Scott Crosskill. Now, Gillian's main claim to fame is that she was from the most important graduating batch at St. Andrew High School. Can you guess which batch?
Yeah. Yours.
In addition to that, Gillian works for Palace Amusement Company, and she was the person who invited us to participate in the screening of Son of God. When was it? Last week or the week before? So we just wanted to know, Gillian, the United Theological College of the West Indies is very open to being invited for special screenings of theological works.
And I have made note of that.
Right. I'm very happy to give Palace Amusement Company our theological reflection.
Yes.
Amen, students?
Amen.
Right. I want to share a little bit on Hyacinth's sermon on the barnyard. How many of you have read it? What? You need to read it. So this is to help you to put in context why we are having the barnyard. I hope you have been taking note of the preparations. What are the elements that are present? And you will hear more as the proceedings continue. This sermon was preached at the opening of a consultation on Caribbean theology held in the summer of 1998. The topic was Caribbean theology in context, and her scripture text was Jeremiah 44, 15 to 23. It is a very provocative text, and the sermon is even more provocative. So let me share with you a part of this sermon. Riddles are embedded in the Jamaican folk tradition. So let me pose you a riddle. Guess me this riddle, and perhaps not. Something is more like church than church. Answer: the Jamaican barnyard, or its Caribbean equivalent. I invite you to reflect with me on Caribbean theology within the context of the barnyard. And from the following perspectives: the theology of the barnyard, people protesting Jeremiah, and a new theology, a different hermeneutic. So firstly, the theology of the barnyard. The historical barnyard in Jamaica was a place where generations of Jamaicans, primarily but not exclusively women, repaired for physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual well-being. To these strongholds they fled in the face of the soul-destroying trauma of their daily existence. Here they found security, comfort, reassurance, acceptance, and what Martin Luther King Jr. said that he found when he came to Jamaica: a feeling of somebodyness. In other words, they found a sense of identity and a balm for their wounded, broken spirits. A. The barnyard was communal. It provided fellowship for lonely hearts. No one was ever alone. Children had parents and were never out in the cold. The mentally disturbed found understanding. B. The barnyard was egalitarian. No place was found there for that hierarchical stratification based on class or color which plagued the dominant culture. There were distinctions, but all were one. There was a democratization of religious functions, each person fulfilling an acceptable role, whether a drummer, religious dancer, singer, medicine person, priest or priestess, prophet or prophetess, dreamer or interpreter of dreams. C. The barnyard was a place of deep spirituality. Within its environs, persons were sensitive to the spiritual dimensions of existence. In its worldview, there was no dichotomy between sacred and secular. All was sacred. Within the context of spirit possession, persons received the necessary power for facing their daily trauma. Materialism received no encouragement within the barnyard precincts. They had all things in common. What is the nearest biblical equivalent of the barnyard? Is it that community which issued from the events of Pentecost, which Peter interpreted as a fulfillment of Joel's prophecy, when the Lord announced that he would pour out his Spirit on all flesh, male and female? That community described so beautifully in Acts 4:32 to 36 as having one heart and one soul and sharing mutually in that which was available? Of course, Mother in the barnyard was not oblivious to the fact that the Orthodox religious establishment cried anathema to her supposedly, in quotes, pagan operations. But she really was unperturbed. Her task was not to conform to the status quo, but to provide an oasis in the desert where her people could come and be nourished. A place where they could find the spiritual sustenance offered to them in a culturally recognized and acceptable form. A sustenance denied them by the orthodox religion of the establishment. The barnyard was the true ecclesia of the dispossessed. I'm going to close with the final paragraph of the first half because you must go read the rest of it. It may be that for Caribbean theology to be authentic, prophetic, and holistic, it will need to renew itself in the barnyard. It may be that the distinctive contribution that the Caribbean can make to world theology is that rather than competing with contemporary and historical theologies that arise out of other legitimate cultural and social realities, it should seek to discover the uniqueness of its theological mission in the barnyard of its own Sitzenleben. Caribbean theologians may be strangely edified were they to have a retreat, and this retreat was held in Siboney on the north coast, a nice upscale hotel. So I have to tell you that so you understand the sentence. Caribbean theologians may be strangely edified were they to have a retreat, not at Siboney on Jamaica's north coast, but in one of our surviving barnyards, if they have not all yet become extinct. And so with these words, I hope you are encouraged enough now to go and read the second part of the sermon. And we are going to start now with the first half of the presentation, which will be by Dr. Hutton. So Clinton, I'm handing over to you. Let's give him a hand.
Brothers and sisters, good evening.
Good evening.
In fact, it is not dying out. It has the barnyard has survived and is doing pretty well. But I would like to talk to you about the historical roots of the barnyard, the revival yard, and the other names it can be given. It's important to understand that, to know why we are here today. The barnyard that Dr. Eisenbuch spoke about came out of the need for enslaved Africans to find a space a refuge where they could repossess themselves in the night, having been possessed in the day by the enslavers. And therefore, the barnyard was a sacred, secret space where enslaved Africans met and carried out what I call rituals of repossession. And in these rituals of repossession, they were repossessed by their ancestral gods and ancestral spirits. And by being repossessed, they were enslaved in the days and abused in the possession, caused them to become the spirits that possess them. So somebody could have been beaten up in the day, forced to eat human excrement in the day, and in the night, that person becomes a god, or a king, or a queen, or some important person. So, that space, that was created by the ancestors. They are what they are now, certainly to me. That space was a very important space, an exceedingly important space. It was a space, therefore, for coping with slavery, where they repossessed their black bodies from those who possessed those bodies in the day. Through enslavement and colonial subjection, the barnyard was a space that was sacred and communal, where the living met with and cultivated ancestral ontologies as the nutrients of being, agency, and redemption. This space is opposite and antithetical to the one that I just described. And I beg your pardon, I'm going to use some graphic words, quoting from some sources to show you what that space that the barnyards was created in opposition to. In Westmoreland, in Western Jamaica, for example, there was a slave holder by the name of Thomas Thistlewood. Thistlewood luckily kept diaries of his activities from 1756 until his death in 1786. And he made there are many diaries, and most of them survived, and they are in Britain. In one of his entries, and there are similar entries to the one I'm going to cite, this enslaved man ran away, one of the most serious crimes that one could ever perpetuate during slavery. They call him Port Royal. It's clear that he did not give himself that name. And there's a thing we need to understand, the power of naming and all of those things. But we're not going to go into that today. However, Port Royal was caught, and this is what Thistlewood wrote about what he ordered to be done to him, and which was done to him. That July day of 1756. Gave him a moderate whipping, pickled him well, and made Hector shit in his mouth. immediately put in a gag whilst his mouth was full and made him wear it 4 to 5 hours. In another example, and therefore this is what the barnyard was a rescue from. I'm just telling you that. So I'm reading them. Another example is told by an eyewitness on a slave war, talking about what the captain of that ship that trafficked Africans to the Caribbean did in order to scare them into submission. He said that the captain of that slave ship, quote, to strike fear in the rest, killed a slave, and dividing heart, liver, and entrails into 300 pieces, made each of the slaves eat one, threatening those who refused with the same torture. And then he wrote, such incidents were not rare. And there are many, numerous that I could cite to you. Those two will do for today. In fact, my next book has an entire chapter of this. The longest chapter in that book. So, it's important to understand what the barnyard meant. It was a place in which, to use the Jamaican language, where the people were able to go and get a bath. A bath in the sense of what strikes you as bad luck, as all the tribulation, and so on. It is where you repair. And they would do that nightly, in nocturnal meetings, in that space. That was usually secret. And so the enslavers could not understand why Africans would stay up after working all day, that they would stay up at nights. They could not understand that. But they were staying up in order to do the things that allow them to cope with their enslavement, that allow them to survive, so that I am talking to you today. So, the barnyard was a space for healing. It was a healing space. Physical, psychological, mental healing. Because these were issues that were central to the existential viability of Africans during slavery. We don't teach about these things, and usually my students ask me, how come we never know these things? We need to know these things. Right? And we also need to know the things that were done in order to thwart what was happening. The barnyard was a space of faith and fortitude. It was. The faith that enslaved Africans developed were developed in the barnyard. And they had faith in their gods. And in revival, which you'll see tonight, you'll see various expressions. Even when revival practitioners, some don't even no longer remember the gods. Yet those gods, in their manifestation in the revival, are very clear. Spirits having to do with water, whose color is primarily yellow. And I learned about as a boy called River Muma. It's a central spirit in revival. And was very important in the healing because the River Muma is a healing spirit. And in revival yards, as you'll see in the slides that I'll show, lots of water, lots of expressions of a River Muma. But you'll also hear in revival about cut and clear. That's the God of the crossroad. The God that was most important to Africans on a day-to-day basis. In some communities, like in Cuba, it retained the African name from Yoruba, like Ba. Or in Brazil, Eshu. Or Eshu like Bara. The spirit of the crossroad. The spirit that reveals, that cut and clear the path of destruction, of evil spirits. And so you'll hear the act of waving the flag or the cutlass is to clear. So you'll find out that revival people today, and I know many of them would go to say right below here in Augustown, from Hermitage going to Augustown, that the road is now deceased. Going down to Augustown, to baptism. And every crossroad that they reach, they would go around the crossroads 3 times, cutting and clearing. As they enter the pool, cutting and clearing. So what they have done, actually, perform African spirituality in order to go and baptize in the name of Christ. That's what they did. Alright? So, I will talk much more, but I'll talk in relation to the slides. So if you could this is part of a revival yard and therefore part of a Balm yard. We're not going to stay long on each slide, but there are flags, grapefruits, as you'll see some on the table up there, coconut at the center, and above there is up here there is a basin with plants, herbal plants, leaf of life, and so on. That's called a medicine seal. A medicine seal. The purpose, for medicinal purpose, for health purpose. And you see ABC, the alphabet down the bottom here. And you would have heard about, even if you're not revival people, you would have heard about Jerusalem school rule. Right? And that's, we're not going to go into that, right? And, okay, let us go through. This is in Westmoreland. I've been actually studying revival for 14 years straight, non-stop. All right, so this is a revival yard in Westmoreland, just part of it. It's a small part of it. All right, and this is inside one of the houses, or huts as they call it. This is the African house, and this is what is inside the African house. It's a thatched round building made from wattle and so on, and that is what it looks like inside. Many of what you see there are signatures of various communities and elements of African expressions. Right? And this is a tradition from the longest while in the enslavement of Africans in Jamaica to this day. This is from Hermitage, and this is an Indian house. And inside the Indian house, because what Africans did was also embrace elements of Indian spirituality. Elements of Indian spirituality are seen throughout revival. In the dress the woman is wearing, madrasa, and on the door, and in the inside, that basket with vegetables and so on. Our vegetarianness really came from India. That the Rastafari is not involved in, and so on. That is probably one of the best contributions of, apart from the current business. And you hear the saying, and I don't like to use the word coolie. I think it's derogative. I don't like to use it. But the way it's used in Jamaica, that coolie duppy is the worst duppy. You heard that? Well, guess what? That's an Indian spirit named Kali. Kali. In fact, the most in Jamaica among Rastafari, the most potent ganja is called Kali, or Kali weed. Right? It is coming out of that Indian tradition. In fact, ganja is also another Indian word. Kali is Indian goddess. Ganja is also Indian. And Kaya, your Mali song, got to have Kaya now. Kaya is actually a Congolese word. Right? So the traditions, both traditions, weave themselves together. And this is inside the Indian house. Let us go. This is a river, or symbol of a river. Symbol of a river Mumo space. It's a seal for the river Mumo. Right? There is this is filled with water. It's so clear that you can see the bottom. You don't even know that water is in there. Right? With the stones denoting the stones that you'll find in the river or the side of the river. Right? And therefore this water seal is to the spirit River Momo. That's in Westmoreland. This is also in Westmoreland, another one. In other words, that revival space placed a lot of emphasis on the river spirit. And therefore they are river people. Alright? At least in part. This is another water seal. And a seal is like a port for the spirit. They're like an airport. It's like a port for the spirit. Right? And this is in St. Anne. And in fact, they use the water for sacred purposes and for clearing and healing and different things. Right? So let us see again on this side. You see the four glasses and so on. So it's quite pervasive across the revival world. See the base up there again, with again the water and candles, denoting tribute to the same spirit. This is a medicine seal again. That is Brazil, down the bottom there. And this is a close-up medicine seal. And the marbles in there represent what long ago in Jamaica was called amber, which were some things that they said would be got from straight out of the grave after some special ceremonies are carried out. Right? So what we have here is a replication, if you will, of that, even if that is no longer practiced. It is now ritualized as part of the healing process. Huh? This is not supposed to be there. Oh boy. This is not supposed, okay. Not supposed to be. I'm sorry. I don't know where this is.
The spirit.
Yeah. All right, good. That's it. This is another medicine seal. So the medicine seal is very important. It's important if you understand what enslaved Africans went through and the need for that to survive, to repair, then you'll understand why that tradition is still so strong. People still need to repair, etc., etc. Right? And revival people are what they call, some of them, they're offices where you go for consultation. Right? To this day. And some of them do it pretty well. No, I'm not talking about that. Look here, one of my younger brothers fell ill. I was about 12, he was about 8. And my mother took him to several doctors. None of the doctors knew what happened to him. I'm telling you about a personal experience. None of the doctors knew what happened to him. And they actually told her to take him and make him comfortable. And by that time he was reduced to literal skin and bone. And in desperation, my mother went to the revival lady in a place of my community called Daily Hole. That's where the Dailies live. And the Dailies were revival people. And the senior Daily was an elderly woman. And I can remember, that's the only time I've seen her. A very old woman. And she bathed him, mixed up some stuff in some bottles, gave him some, gave my mother instruction as to how to deal with it. And by the time we actually have to lift him up to take him to Miss Beck's place. And by the time we reach home, this boy will run up and down. He has never been to the doctor since. He's in his 40s. He's in his 40s. He has never been to the doctor since. So, there are certain knowledge that you must not underestimate. Alright, so